So, remember when I said about Spider-Man 2 that there were a couple coincidences here and there, like Doc Ock breaking into the bank that Peter Parker just so happened to be in? Yeah, well, wait until you meet Spider-Man 3. What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to Access Blockbusters. We are in the season of Spider-Man, getting ready for Spider-Man No Way Home. So excited for that movie. And in the meantime, I'm going to be reviewing and revisiting every single live-action Spider-Man film, starting with 2002's Spider-Man. If you haven't seen the other two videos, I reviewed Spider-Man 1 and Spider-Man 2, links down below in the description, but today we are going to be talking about probably the most infamous out of all of the films, maybe with the exception of The Amazing Spider-Man 2, and that is Spider-Man 3. As always, full spoilers ahead, and if you haven't subscribed to the Access Blockbusters channel and you want to join the Access Blockbusters crew, make sure to subscribe, give this video a like, and without further ado, let's talk about Spider-Man 3. So look, there's no beating around the bush. In general, this is probably the most disliked Spider-Man film of the original trilogy. I don't think there's many people in this world who would say they enjoy this movie more than Spider-Man 1 or Spider-Man 2. But within those groups of people, there is actually a wide variety of opinions. For example, some people think this is by far and away the worst Spider-Man film out of the 7 live-action Spider-Man films. Other people think, yeah, it's okay. It's not a bad film. Some people actually really like it, and good on you if you're one of them. So how did I feel when rewatching Spider-Man 3? To be quite honest with you, I thought it was fine. I also think it's wildly inconsistent and kind of a disaster, but still a decent movie. The best example that I could give to compare Spider-Man 3 to is the film Iron Man 2. Now, if you've seen my rewatch review of Iron Man 2, you'll know that I had a very good time watching that movie, despite the fact that it was just wildly all over the place. And one of the big reasons for that is that Iron Man 2 had so many different subplots going on that didn't actually connect to each other at the end, that it just became inconsistent, incoherent, and just a big action mess. Spider-Man 3 is much the same. There is a good movie in there. There is a very good movie in there, just like there is with Iron Man 2. Unfortunately, Sam Raimi just couldn't pick a lane. That's basically it. He had very good ideas going into this movie, but this concept of Spider-Man 3 that they decided to pull was basically 3 movies put into one. And what I mean by that is, look, you could have an entire movie dedicated to Harry and Peter. That honestly would have been the better Spider-Man 3 following the Spider-Man 2 story. It's just Harry versus Peter. It would have been a great movie, and most of the scenes in Spider-Man 3 between them are great. And then you could have had Spider-Man 4 with Sandman and Peter. And Sandman was awesome in this movie. I mean, his backstory was great, the visuals were pretty good, and the character development was really nicely executed. And then you could have had Spider-Man 5 with Venom, and that would have been an equally fascinating movie where you have the symbiote attaching to Peter Parker and seeing what it does to him, minus, of course, all of the emo stuff, which we'll get to. Look, all of that to say is that there are some awesome elements to this movie that are just buried underneath a bunch of inconsistencies that just don't quite mesh together well. For example, towards the end of the film when Sandman and Venom team up, it's weird, it's random. And it's explained away by a really quick scene because there just isn't time to explore that. Like, Venom just comes up to Sandman's like, hey, I want the spider dead. Are you in? Sandman's like, yep, I'm in. And it's inconsistent with his character because at the end of the movie he says, I didn't want to kill your uncle, I'm a good person, I'm just looking out for my daughter, when he teams up with this angry tooth black Spider-Man suit guy. And if we're talking about inconsistencies, look, there's no getting around it that this Spider-Man film has some of the worst Spider-Man scenes in the Raimi trilogy. The emo Peter Parker scenes are not good. I mean, they're hilarious, sure, looking at them in hindsight, but they are not good. They are really bad. And there's a really random scene where MJ and Harry are just cooking and there's a montage, and it's just, there are some scenes in this movie, you know, where you kind of look back and go, why did that happen? But still, let's talk about the good in this movie, because I really do think that there are some great elements to this movie. First of all, I think that for the most part, Peter and MJ's relationship, at least in terms of story, is the strongest that it's been in the 3 movies. I think that this idea of Peter proposing, but then things getting in the way, I think that works as an emotional crux of the movie. Again, I'm not in love with Kirsten Dunst as Mary Jane Watson, but she does her part, and she's fine. And I also think the dynamic between Peter and Harry in this film works really well. Now, it's kind of random that he gets amnesia, and it's a convenient plot device because he has to forget that he's the new Goblin right after that big cliffhanger in Spider-Man 2, so kind of just have to go with that. But still, I like their interactions. I like how Harry is starting to remember things about himself as the Goblin, and I think their fight is pretty good in Harry's mansion. I think there are some elements of the Peter symbiote suit that work really nicely, like bringing out his darker side, especially in that club. I mean, the club dancing is really cringy, but the way that he lashes out at people and becomes a different person, it's really dynamic character work, actually. Because even in the Venom standalone movie, you don't really see this duality between normal, nice Eddie Brock and then violent Eddie Brock. You just kind of see Eddie possessed by the symbiote. Here, we see Peter Parker and his duality. I mean, it's kind of cheesy that they represent it with his hair, but still, it works. Now, going to the villains, Thomas Hayden Church, I think, gives a fantastic performance as Flint Marko, although he was very much underutilized in this movie, and that's fine. Because if you tried to develop his entire backstory in this movie, it would have just been even more of a bloated mess. I think Topher Grace is okay. He kind of plays into the cheesier parts of these Spider-Man films, more than the actual seriousness that Thomas Hayden Church plays into with Sandman, but he's okay. He's a decent foil to Spider-Man. So you have all these disparate plot elements coming together at the end of the day. But look, let's go back to what I was saying at the beginning. I mean, it's fine to have all these plot elements coming together at the end, but one of the things about this movie, there are so many coincidences. There are a ridiculous amount of coincidences. It's insane. First of all, the guy that happens to be the Sandman is also the guy who happened to kill Ben Parker. How in the world does that happen? Secondly, the Venom symbiote happened to land 50 feet away from Peter Parker and latch on to the one person in this universe who is a superhero. Third of all, Eddie Brock happens to be at the church at the exact moment when Peter Parker is taking off the suit. How are these things happening? There are moments in this movie where you just have to step back and go, that just doesn't happen in real life. I know it's a Spider-Man film, but they really start to add up. Like, you suspend your disbelief to a certain extent, but man, it gets to that point where you're like, oh, I don't know about that. I really don't know about that. Even in Spider-Man 2, the Doc Ock thing that I keep mentioning, I was like, okay, maybe. But look, at the end of the day, this movie is entertaining, and one of the things that I haven't talked about that I really enjoyed was actually the final fight. Now, given that they didn't really develop the villains, it wasn't more than just, spectacle and action, but I actually found myself very much enjoying the final fight. It was Sandman and Venom against Peter and Harry, and I love the Peter and Harry dynamic there. Like, I love how they're teaming up, and I love how Harry finds that redemption within himself. And again, it's part of that Harry Osborn arc that I think could have been developed into an entire movie. Peter versus New Goblin. Again, all this to say that I think Spider-Man 3 has a great movie inside of there. I think it has 3 great movies inside of there. Unfortunately, for whatever reason, because there were plans for Spider-Man 4, so this was not it for Sam Raimi, but he decided to put everything in the kitchen sink in this movie. And that really is what bogs this film down. Other than that, if you're just going into it just wanting to have a good time, then I think you will. If you want to go into it hating it, I think you will hate it. But I myself had a good time watching the movie. So I'll give Spider-Man 3 a C+ and a 6 out of 10. And those are my thoughts on Spider-Man 3, and that wraps up the Spider-Man Sam Raimi trilogy. So, what do you guys think of Spider-Man 3? Let me know in the comments down below. We are going to be doing a couple other videos before we move on to the Amazing Spider-Man, so stay tuned for that. If you haven't subscribed already, then please make sure to do so. Give this video a like, and if you want to check out some more videos, check out the videos on the screen right now. Thanks for watching, and I will see you in the next one.